Hey guys, this is part 2 of my interview with James Corbett. In the second half of the interview, we talk about MH17, de-dollarization, Ebola, and the police state which has made itself evident in Ferguson.
Do we want the BRICS style of globalization, central bank fiat funny money, or do we want the Federal Reserve style? Well, I'm here to say that no, it isn't a choice, but either or. There's many other options on the table. So let's open that menu up and start to order from it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We need to defund this vampire, which is so maniacal. And I guess in the time that we have left with you, James, I just want to talk about how maniacal and diabolical they are. And when I say they, I mean the intelligence agencies and the banks and the banksters, and you know the ties between the CIA and the banksters. I want to just throw out a couple of current events and get your thoughts on them. What do you make of MH17 and what we see happening there with Kiev versus Putin?
Well, I think the most interesting aspect of MH17 is that it has completely disappeared from the news radar, which at any rate, no matter what really occurred there or how it really occurred, shows that whatever they were planning to use it for propagandistically did not pan out. And that, I think, is telling in and of itself. Yeah. Obviously, this was an event that was going to be used to try to demonize Putin and potentially to force the situation in Ukraine to a head. But it ultimately did not have that effect. And I think that's ultimately because the evidence that they have attempted to corral to muster to muster public opinion on their side just simply fell flat on its face. And
the evidence they did not produce?
Exactly. It ultimately amounted to some social media posts by various people, which is, I mean, on its face ridiculous. And it's part of this same fantasy land that we're being increasingly asked to live in which you have an agency like the NSA or the CIA or these various intelligence agencies that, of course, have the ability to track anyone and everything that's happening on the face of the planet. But, you know, entire airplanes can go missing, as in the case of MH370, or airplanes could be shot down in the case of MH17, and no one really knows what happened, and there can be no evidence produced on any of these things. Again, I think it's this type of fantasy land that we're being asked to live in, and MH17 is a good example of that. And in fact, I have had an open source investigation on MH17 on the Corbett Report website for the last few weeks, and people have been contributing. We've had a couple of hundred comments, hundreds and hundreds of links to various articles and things. I'm going to be compiling that and compressing it down and releasing a podcast on that in the next couple of weeks, so people can stay tuned to try to find out where that story ultimately ended up and where it's likely to go from here.
Yeah, I just think it's shocking that the powers that be in this country would so blatantly try to pin this on Putin without any evidence, essentially, and then on the Russian side, they tried to be very forthcoming. I just think from a global perspective, especially if you're outside this country, it made our leaders in this country look very, very foolish, and I think it's all becoming so transparent. It reminds me of the war drums to topple Assad, to go into Syria, and after Obama did his plea on TV to the American people, 90% of the American people were like, you want to go into war again? Where? Why? With my kids? Hell no. And I just think that the playbook that these guys keep going back to time and time again is worn out. It's tired. We can all, even if you're not fully awake and don't understand how the Federal Reserve works and what it is, people are starting to see the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is head-scratching that they have attempted to use the Syrian Red Line or MH17 in this propagandistic way, despite having almost nothing to back it up, especially in a post-Iraq world, where obviously the first and foremost thing on everyone's mind is the fact that we were completely lied to about the run-up to the Iraq war. This is not in dispute anymore. Everyone understands how that happened. So the hubris involved with thinking that they can get away with continuing those types of propounding those types of lies is just ridiculous. But perhaps this is my conspiratorial mind speaking, but I think we are in the age where we have seen the zenith of the American empire, and we are seeing the beginning of the decline. And I think that these are reflections of that. The fact that the American military / industrial might that, of course, is really the banking might that really is the president. I mean, they own and control him. Can't can't really direct the narrative on things like these anymore is clearly a sign that there has been an incredible lack in or incredible decline in the power that America is able to assert, a decline in its political capital on the international stage. And I think that this is, at this point, part of a long-term agenda. Again, I think it's important to understand that the banking powers are absolutely not committed to the United States. They have no patriotism to this country, and of course, a lot of them are not American in the first place. So why would they be? And this is an important point for people to understand. Just because the United States has been a serviceable host for these banksters for the last several generations does not mean that it will continue to be so. And when and if it becomes time to abandon that ship, as it increasingly looks that it is, America will be left high and dry and will be left to suffer the consequences of the things that have been done in the name of the American people. And of course, not with the active support and encouragement of the American people, but it's been done in their name, so they will suffer the consequences of that in every possible way, the economic ramifications, the military ramifications, and I think that this is the beginning of that downward slope, and I think that's something that the American public should be very concerned with, and that's why they need to distance themselves from that banking vampire system as much as possible right now, so that it is very clear that this banking system and the military system that it owns and controls is not associated with the American public.
Yeah, just a couple more questions for you about current events, being that you're in Japan and I'm here in the United States, and I just really value your opinion here. But you used one of my favorite words, and it's hubris. The hubris of these people is absolutely stunning, and I guess at the end of the day, that's what gets me, is their hubris. And take, for instance, the hubris of the CDC. What do you take of them bringing in 2 Ebola patients to this country? I find it stunning because, if they wanted to study Ebola and test those patients, if they were so benevolent and cared so much for those patients, they could have flown down there, which they did, incidentally, to pick them up, but they could have stayed there and treated them. Do you find it absolutely stunning that they would have imported Ebola into the United States?
It certainly makes no sense from any perspective that one can imagine, except for the perspective that this is a precedent-setting event. And I don't think that this was done as part of some plan to spread Ebola in the United States or anything of that sort. But I think the precedent now has been set that when there is this type of pandemic outbreak anywhere in the world, well, of course we're going to fly the Americans back home to treat them in Atlanta or wherever else is deemed fit. And it's interesting the way that the protocols for dealing with this exact type of situation have changed from 2002, where, as I noted in my most recent podcast, the U.S. AMRID, of course, the biological weapons research arm of the Department of Defense, back in 2002, the U.S. AMRID protocol officer was talking in a publication about the protocols that they have in place for dealing with people suffering from Ebola or other types of extremely contagious diseases. And at that time, they were talking about how this would be handled by the military, and it would be handled in BSL-4 facilities, biosafety level 4 facilities. And now, fast forward 12 years, and suddenly this is under the purview of the Center for Disease Creation, right. Control, who have created this isolation ward at Emory University Hospital, which does not, from what I can understand, what I can tell, and I think details of this are being kept deliberately sketchy, but certainly does not appear to be a BSL-4 type facility, right, where the patients are separated from the public by a thin glass partition and nothing else.
Yeah, I think it's level 2 at best.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at an actual level 4 facility, and again, that's linked up in the Ebola panic or pandemic article I have up on the front page of CorbettReport.com right now. If you look at some of the pictures of a BSL-4, it's clearly not the university hospital type environment. This is more like a military research type facility. So absolutely, they've changed the protocols. They've established a precedent here. I think there's a lot of precedents that get set during these times of supposed panic. And again, for people in the United States, I really don't think you should be panicked about Ebola at this particular time, considering it has not spread person to person in any other country except for those West African countries where the outbreak occurred. So I think a lot of hype and panic and fear is being instilled in the public right now as a way of justifying the really incredible and precedent-setting things that are happening right now. And as you say, I think, again, there is a bit of hubris that's going on that perhaps is catching up with the CDC, as they've had to admit a number of really embarrassing mistakes in recent months, including not only mishandling of some anthrax samples, but now they've just come out in the past few days to admit that, oops, that one of our researchers accidentally mixed a very deadly live bird flu strain with a weaker strain, and lied and covered up about that mistake for several weeks before we finally had to admit it. So
reminds me
again,
of Baxter International a few years ago. Just accidentally put deadly bird flu in a vaccine and shipped it all over the planet.
And there was also, I believe it was Sanofi, I'll have to look that up, but it was experimenting with a bird flu vaccine on homeless people in Poland, and a lot of them ended up dying because it turned out to be a real strain of bird flu that killed them. So, again, these types of things are happening with disturbing frequency in this day and age, and that combined with all of the cultural conditioning that's going on towards contagion and the idea of outbreaks, which are being increasingly inserted into Hollywood productions and television shows.
Right, and getting the vaccine. Go out and get the vaccine. That's what I'm afraid of. And I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to ask you this before I forget, and forgive me because I don't have the document in front of me, but we posted something not too long ago at SGT Report. It was a patent document showing that the U.S. government, through the CDC, has a patent on human Ebola. Have you seen that, or does that shock you, or what's your take
yes,
on that?
In fact, I do talk about this in my recent podcast. It's called The Ebola Effect, so you can search that on YouTube, or you can look on my website under podcasts. And we do talk about that. The CDC has been patenting viruses for a number of years now, and the earliest I found, but I didn't look very hard, but the earliest I found was a report from 2003 where the CDC was patenting SARS. And the official reason why do they do this, they say it is because private companies are attempting to patent these viruses, which would obviously, in the event of an epidemic or pandemic, would be extremely problematic because you would then need to license the virus itself in order to do research on it. So the CDC is saying we're going to patent these viruses in order to make them part of the public domain. And so far, at any rate, that's what they've been doing. They haven't been charging researchers for use of these patents. So not exactly the type of scare scenario that some in the alternative media have made it out to be. And furthermore, the specific strain of Ebola that the CDC has the patent on that people are pointing to is not the strain of Ebola that is the current outbreak. So a couple of things that kind of temper our criticism on those regards.
Okay, very good. Maybe not as sinister as we previously thought, although you did joke yourself, the Center for Disease Creation, and we all are very suspicious of what's going on. I do find it absolutely insane that they imported 2 Ebola patients into the country. Okay, so we've covered MH17 and Ebola. The last thing on my agenda for you was to ask you about your thoughts about what's happening in Ferguson, Missouri. What is your take on these militarized police as you look on from the sunny climes of Japan, as you like to say?
Well, that is interesting because obviously I think I'm doubly removed from this situation. I mean, I'm not American in the first place. I'm Canadian. And secondly, here I am in Japan where I've been for the last 10 years. So I think I really am doubly removed from what's going on there. So I certainly don't claim to comment on the sort of culture there in the United States that has led to the sort of bubbling over of these tensions. But in terms of the buildup of the police state itself, as my friend Brock West of AP Perspective tweeted out the other day, I don't know why people are so surprised at the militarization that the police are demonstrating right now, because I thought we'd established that years ago. And I've certainly been watching this from such things as the G20 back in, I believe it was Pittsburgh a few years ago, where they unleashed the LRAD sound cannons and the creepy images of police, basically SWAT police in black death gear, coming along in the streets with their loudspeakers saying, "This is now an unlawful assembly, clear out or you will be arrested." All of these, I mean, scenes that would be out of some sort of nightmare science fiction movie just a couple of decades ago are now taking place on the streets of the United States. So I certainly see this as part and parcel of a sort of an agenda of militarization of the police that's been happening for a very long time. And it is absolutely disgusting and horrifying to see this taking place and to see this being done and rolled out, and the public again being conditioned to accept this because, well, we can't have looting, so we might as well have basically military police with tear gas stopping even press from reporting on things like this. Again, it's just ludicrous on its face, but this is all, I think this is all part and parcel of everything that we've been talking about, the decline of the American empire and the coming economic collapse, and the sort of decline of American power throughout the world. I think that's all part and parcel of the fact that America is now becoming this lockdown police state, and they're sort of stepping out from the shadows in terms of the overt control of the American society. And I think we're likely to see more of these types of events spilling over as that economic decline continues to happen, even if it isn't an overnight collapse scenario. Just the general lessening of the standard of living in the United States is going to have these types of effects more and more often. And again, I think the public is just being prepped to accept that the police are basically going to be these vampiric military SWAT death wraiths from something like out of a fantasy movie. And unfortunately, I don't see a way out of that in terms of direct confrontation between the public and the police, because unfortunately the government tends to have the upper hand technologically speaking in these situations. I think the real change is going to happen in the consciousness, and we've seen that in recent years in some of the protests that were taking place in Europe, where the police in Spain and other places did cross the line and did join the protesters. It can happen. It has happened before many times throughout history. These people are not automatons, so I think we have to really reach out to people in the police and military as potential allies of the American people, because again, these aren't robots. At least at this point, the drone armies haven't been released yet. So I think we have to reach out to the humanity of these people and get them to see that they are the targets of this system every bit as much as the average person in the United States.
Yeah, agreed. And if there's good news, it's that we can see resistance to this militarized police force in Ferguson. We see people standing up. We see people speaking out. We see very articulate people at these press conferences, actually, wondering where the justice is and why there hasn't been an indictment against the police officer who executed the man who was shot 8 times. And so we know the Pentagon militarized the Ferguson police force. It's documented. And now I guess the best way to prove that you have a tyrannical government is to get them to act like it. And that's what they're doing. And they're being met with peaceful resistance, which I think is the answer. And it certainly is good news, if there's any good news coming out of Ferguson, Missouri. I know I have to let you go. One last question, and it's this. Fukushima scares the heck out of me, and I'm nowhere near it. Does it scare the heck out of you, and could you see yourself having to evacuate Japan at any point in the future?
Well, I mean, obviously, it could. There could be the need for evacuation for any number of reasons, for any number of nuclear reactors throughout the country, let alone Fukushima. But certainly at this point, obviously, I'm still living here with my family, so I don't think it's quite the world-ending type of scenario that some have posited it as being. Although it certainly is a cause of concern, and right now, I mean, the situation as it exists is still a daily struggle at the site to contain even just the water that they're furiously pumping in to keep the situation under quote unquote control. Obviously, is not any type of control, because that contaminated water is being stored on site in all of these tanks that themselves are leaking. It's disaster upon disaster. So obviously, I mean, that region of Japan is very much in a sad state, and that creates all sorts of other problems. Like, for example, just as one particular example, there's a large fast food chain here in Japan that a year and a half ago or so announced that they were going to be sourcing all of their rice from Fukushima from now on to support the Fukushima region and the farmers of that region. So again, there are very worrying things that happen here, and I think if for people who are in Japan, I think they have to be very careful where they're sourcing their food from and things of that nature, as myself and my family are part of a green cooperative that sources local, organic, non-GMO GMO foods that they radiation test. So it is possible, I think, to at least be wary of the things that are going on here. And of course, we have to keep abreast of what's happening with the site and the melted down cores that they still don't know where they are, because they can't even get into the reactors to form any sort of survey of the corium. And to figure out how it's lying and where it's lying. They continue to release bits and pieces and drips and drabs over the course of years, which I think is part of, again, of the plan. I think just like in the early days, they knew within 24 hours that they had a meltdown on their hands, but they've neglected to tell the public that for the course of months. I think they probably know more about what's happening at the site than they're letting on. And the latest is that they're saying that the reactor 3 is in a worse situation than they believed originally, with all of the core having melted down to the bottom of the containment vessel. So again, we have to be very wary about what's happening there. But having said that, I think that for people in the United States and Canada on the West Coast there that are concerned about the effects of Fukushima, I think that they have to also be very careful about what information they're taking on board with that. And there is a citizen-led initiative that's taking place right now called Inform, and I have a link to that up on my Fukushima website, FUKUSHIMAupdate.com, that are taking samples on the west coast of the United States and in Canada's far north and other places right now that are it's crowdsourced and crowdfunded, and this citizen initiative is sampling for looking for signs of Fukushima radiation. The Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute has already done some sampling on the West Coast and found no sign of Fukushima radiation on the West Coast. I think that there is a lot of hype that's going on in the alternative media as well surrounding this issue. And I wonder to the extent to which the American nuclear industry benefits from the type of hype that's surrounding Fukushima in the United States right now, meaning that people don't pay attention to what's happening literally in their own backyards. For example, just earlier this year at the Hanford site in Washington State, just miles from the Columbia River, the most contaminated site in the United States, was having its own leak problems. And under tank AY-102, they found, I think, 800,000 count levels of radioactivity with high dose rates that required workers to limit their time in the area in order to not exceed their lifetime recommended dose of radiation. And there was great concern about the leaks that were taking place there. The average American hasn't heard anything about that in the media, despite the fact that this was taking place just a short time ago in a site that, again, was just miles away from the Columbia River. And why is that? I mean, why are none of these nuclear issues in the United States being reported on anymore? And I think that this might, in fact, play into the nuclear industry's hands in America, that people are not looking in their own backyard for some of the problems that are demonstrably there.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on that. I'm going to let you go in a second. I want to thank you for that, because it gets real scary to see even the mainstream media reporting about the unprecedented die-off of starfish and other sea life on the West Coast. And of course, they never mention Fukushima radiation. So for those of us who are informed, we immediately fear that that's exactly what it is. Could you shout out your Fukushima site, your website again there, for people to visit and learn about your research and intelligence on Fukushima?
FUKUSHIMAupdate.com. FUKUSHIMAupdate.com. That's all one word. It's linked on CorbettReport.com, so you can find a link there. And on the starfish wasting syndrome specifically, you can find a post up on there, 3 reasons why Fukushima radiation has nothing to do with starfish wasting syndrome, primarily because the phenomenon was documented in a study that was published in 2009, 2 years before Fukushima even took place. So, again, I think a lot of people are finding and discovering all of these problems in the Pacific Ocean that may or may not be linkable to Fukushima, but they are taking that stretch even when it's not really supported by the evidence. So it is important to keep abreast of these various things that are happening. Again, I don't want to dissuade people from doing research, but I think we have to be, again, careful about what types of claims are being made here.
Well said. The evidence of bad things being done, though, by bad people is certainly made clear in your documentary, Century of Enslavement, The History of the Federal Reserve, and I sure hope people will go to CorbettReport.com and buy a DVD copy for themselves, friends, family, get the word out, and certainly do watch it at least for free at the Corbett Report YouTube channel. Our guest has been my new friend and somebody I've held in high esteem for a very long time, James Corbett. James, I can't thank you enough for all your time.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sean. As I say, I do appreciate your work, so thank you for doing what you do.
My pleasure. And guys, thanks so much for taking the time to listen and share this interview with others. We wouldn't be doing it without your support and help. Give us a like if you liked it. Share it with those you love. And do visit us at sgtreport.com for real truth, real news 24/7. And check out thecorbettreport.com for more real news from the one and only James Corbett. Thanks, you guys. Have a great week. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Sean.
Bye-bye.
Take care.